Like our business is suffering.
Panic.
We're doing a terrible job. So let's cut costs, at on every corner. All right, episode 2. First off, happy birthday to Stevie Boy.
Thank you.
It's actually his 36th birthday.
Yeah.
We're only a few months apart, but I'm obviously older and wiser.
But I look younger and fresher, so...
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Wish you 100 more.
Cheers.
Abel mitsene.
Not sure I could cope with another 100.
It's a literal translation of an Arabic saying.
What does it
I
mean?
wish you 100 more years.
100 more years.
Yeah, Abel mitsene.
Very good. Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. I don't want to get to 136. That's
No,
for sure.
no, it'd be... Unless the body stays the same. Anyway.
Today's topic is about... planning versus being spontaneous, reacting versus strategic, etc. A debate you and me have all the time. We meet more in the middle than we'll admit, but generally we represent different sides of the aisle.
Yep.
You and me work really, really, really well ever since we've been together because we are somewhat opposites in this space.
Agreed.
But over time, we have kind of come together and understood the value of both sides.
Yep.
And kind of really, obviously, kind of believe that somewhere in the middle is where all organizations should be. However, I think it's really important that we speak about it because every single year, come September, come the slump or coming out of the slump of August, every single brand that we work with, all of the customers that we have, and even people that we know and industries that we kind of support on the sidelines, companies that we've invested in, they all make the same mistakes.
Yep.
They turn most of their resources off and slow down like crazy in the summer because revenue dips. And then in September, they're caught chasing their tail, trying to find a way to reactivate kind of everything and turn everything back on. And the reason we want to talk about it is because obviously September comes every year. The summer happens every summer.
Yep.
There are
Pretty
no surprises. And these are things that you can plan, yet no organization, large or small, established or new, has really found a way to manage these seasonal shifts. And we believe that the Middle East is somewhat plagued with an allergy to planning and strategy in general. So we wanted to talk about that. And the way we want to talk about it is, let's talk about generally the problem and framing it kind of properly so people understand what we're talking about. But also, I genuinely am more comfortable in being reactive and being kind of spontaneous and a bit chaotic. And you're probably genuinely more comfortable being a bit more strategic and planned. And let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages.
Yep.
So, number one, I think...
well, let's frame it. How do we get here?
Yeah.
Like, why is, and look at it from a, I would say this is a regional thing because I don't see this as much outside. There's still the ability to be reactive, but there's a way that we get to that, and I'll come to that later. But here, why are we so reactive?
There's so many reasons.
I'm sure there is.
But let's talk about kind of the uniqueness of this market, right?
Yep.
So first of all, summertime is a huge slump. I mean, every customer that we have, every business that we're associated to, us included, come July, August, it's like huge dips.
But when I'm doing my annual forecast at the start of the year, I can forecast that.
Yeah, but we don't.
No, because we work in weeks and months.
Tops, right? Naturally the region, number one, doesn't plan further ahead or doesn't even think ahead past, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks in most businesses. And naturally, even when they do put together some sort of revenue tracker or planner, when it comes to the summer, they don't reflect realistic views of their businesses.
Yeah.
They do put a slowdown, but they don't put a dip.
Yeah.
Because every company likes to pretend like the dip doesn't happen. Right? And so what they do is they just flatline it instead of actually reduce it. Right? So every company we've ever seen, every P&L we've ever seen, every KPI of revenue that we've ever seen, every chart flatlines but it doesn't go down.
But is that because we operate the view of, well, what is a successful month or quarter? And therefore, whatever the outcome of that previous one is, determines the one in front of us. Instead of saying, okay, let's look at this is what we want to achieve. And this is the way that I would do it. I can my point of view on this. If you want to know what you want to achieve as a business over the course of 12 or 24 months, and then you average that out over a period of time, and you know that you have peaks and troughs within that, like any normal market condition, you would avoid the chaos that potentially comes with summer slumps.
I think the problem is management, to your point, typically looks at growth vis-a-vis the previous month rather than vis-a-vis the same month the previous year. Right?
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing an expectation that a company needs to be continuously growing month to month.
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the growth rates that are discussed in any organization.
Yeah.
Startups alike to large organizations. They talk about month to month growth.
Yeah.
Nobody talks year to year or month to year, right?
Yeah.
And so, when you talk about organizations and their KPIs or OKRs, anything that we've seen out there today, it's a month to month target, right? Which is unsustainable for a very seasonal impacted region like the Middle East.
Yeah.
Right. And so what do people do? They don't want to see negative rates or negative growth rates. So they flatline at a max. They don't want to go below, which is extremely unrealistic. Right. And then when it does go negative, they see it as a huge red flag. Our business is suffering.
Panic.
We're doing a terrible job. So let's cut cost, on every corner, and generally completely disenable the business, right?
Which is an immediate, and it is this dopamine hit of short-term fixes, because that immediate. So we turn down during that period of summer. Let's play out a scenario. You go into summer, you've been full throttle going into summer, and you believe that you will continue going full throttle 10% month on month from there on in, right? Depending on what stage you're at, 30%, whatever. Yeah. And then you get to summer and you realize that things are going down the pan. Your costs are skyrocketing or staying the same, but your revenue is decreasing. So you turn things off. Short term, fine, your costs are leveled out. Longer term, you've completely destroyed your future funnel. Yeah. Because when you turn, say you turn performance marketing off, you turn it down, then immediately you have a knock-on effect for 4, 6, 8 weeks past that. And then on top of that, you then have no kind of awareness really around your business as things start to pick back up, because we're only operating in what's right in front of us, not what's operating ahead of us. Yeah. Because obviously if you plan for the future, you're basically planning to bring the future to the present.
And I think fundamentally, to go back to the topic of planning and strategy, I think the main issue is organizations in the Middle East, they don't get into I think enough detail when they do their planning or strategy at the beginning of every fiscal year, right? So what I mean by that is if they've agreed that there's a growth rate that they're targeting for the year, they tend to map it out on a month-to-month growth rate objective, but they don't tend to map out kind of how the business is going to be, focusing on different things at different periods in the year. Like there are growth months, and then there are, operations months. There are, comms months, and there are loyalty months, and there are. So I think businesses generally here don't dive down deep enough beyond just a revenue growth objective, and don't understand the benefits and opportunities that they have in different parts of the year, right? So rather than look at a slump in revenue of July and August as a negative thing, if you were to kind of leverage that and say, okay, that's a product month, that's a month that we're going to fix all the issues that we have in our product, and since we're going to slow down in a revenue and an acquisition, let's say perspective, let's focus more of our resources and focus on things that are better for our product, for our existing customers, for our loyalty programs, for our new verticals, for new markets, whatever it is, right? And so we don't have that level of strategy that's built into any plan. Well, not that I've seen, whether there's really established brands that I've worked with before or clients that we have today that might, be startups as well. So we don't see that. The other thing I think that really frustrates us today at DUCKLIFE is when you get to September, because a lot of these organizations in July and August have slowed down or tried to cut costs to manage their bleeding, to kind of, counter the loss in revenue that they have in their plans, naturally they've turned off a lot of things, right? So they've turned off performance marketing or really put it to the minimum. They've kind of reduced, all their comms. They've maybe even reshaped their organizations, a lot of them,
Yep.
Unfortunately, from a marketing perspective, the marketing teams and comms teams and social teams and content teams all take a hit.
So yo-yo.
Right. So all your kind of abilities to market your products and services is kind of reduced. Come September, not to mention, they'll reduce their scopes with us, they'll reduce their spends with us.
Yep.
And what we'll do as an organization is kind of really trying to backfill with different things, right?
Yep.
So either other clients or our own initiatives, our own companies, etc. But without fail, every September, every single year, what happens is organizations then wake up, realize that the comeback of their revenue is not happening as quick as they'd like, and they come to us and they're in a panic. They need a campaign. They need performance marketing to be all guns blazing. They need to create all these growth levers all over again, and they want to grow like crazy. But unfortunately, it's not possible. It's not possible because it takes time to scale your digital channel. It takes time to create content and ads and build a strategy for your campaigns and roll things out. It takes time to do all these things. And if now we're totally backfilled and now we don't have any more capacity, then our customers, then get frustrated with us, and we push things to October, we push things to November, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, although I completely agree that planning has its advantages, I also want to talk about the disadvantages that it might bring. Right? And this is where you and me, I think, butt heads to some extent.
Well, I mean, you've just laid out such an amazing case for why you would plan. So I'd love to hear the high level of why you wouldn't.
So here's what I think. I think there are areas where strategy and planning are absolutely warranted. Right? I think things like, your spend on media, digital or traditional. Your kind of proposition messaging and services and products and segments that you want to focus on. I think there are things that need to be planned and things that need to be strategic, right? So things that enable organizations. So your budget, your offering, how you want your margins to evolve throughout the year, what markets you want to focus on, where you want to grow, where you want to mature, where you want to have more loyalty, etc. So I agree that strategy and planning as a whole needs to exist. What I am allergic to and what I hate in organizations and what I think is actually bad for business is trying to lock how a brand should speak, how a brand should, which channels they should focus on, which audiences they should focus on, and generally kind of trying to ring fence or lock one positioning. And I know that goes against branding in general. Branding is all about consistency. But one thing I find that in today's society is necessary for brands to be relevant is to be absolutely in touch with what's going on and to ride trends, try to ride, changes, try to, ride content, evolution. And brands today need to be able to wear their emotion on their sleeve and really be totally transparent and authentic. And I think the way people talk, the channels people are socializing on, so all the social channels, if you try to be too strategic, if you try to lock how you sound, what you talk about, what you don't talk about, then you come off really inauthentic and completely irrelevant. So when I see organizations that are so rigid in what they are ready to talk about, when they are ready to talk about it, and what channels they want to talk about it on, that's when you start to see channels that are brands that are really unable to connect with its audiences. So I think being reactive, being spontaneous, being a bit chaotic as a brand today is necessary to be relevant, because the mediums that we kind of communicate on are that way, right? So what will trend tomorrow on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram, we have no idea, right? So in order for a brand to plan and to ring fence what it's going to do from a content and communication standpoint, I actually think that type of strategy and planning is bad for business, right? And so giving the ability for organizations to be absolutely reactive and off the cuff is something that all brands need to be able to do, which goes against all strategy and planning.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack. And that, but I'm going to start. I'm going to start with the. So when we talk about planning strategy, any brand should have a basic strategy or positioning of who they are. So we understand that as a brand, we stand for this. We know our mission, we know our vision, we know our values, and within that, we kind of articulate what are the areas or fields that we want to kind of stretch into and what we want to avoid. That's a basic planning framework. At that point, you then have owners. So you have owners who represent that brand. I mean, this is a whole separate topic, but as marketeers, a lot of marketeers today, be it CMOs, whose role has been diminished greatly, and the people that sit within that, be it a social team, creative team, brand managers, whatever it is, they have been disempowered like by an enormous amount.
Completely.
Because if you at a basic level, you set the plan and strategy for your brand, and then you empower these people who are the owners of your brand's communication. Everyone's a brand owner, fundamentally, if you work for a brand, but if they are the owners of your communication, they should be allowed to express themselves, because they've been hired for that exact reason, express themselves and the brand's position in market. So when it comes to planning and strategy, sure, I'm not one who advocates for you must have 100% documentation with PowerPoints coming out your ass because no one gives a shit and no one reads them. So, there's none of this crap needs to exist. But if you sat there and say, okay, well, here's a rough framework of kind of, say, call it 70% of our budget that we are pretty planned for. We are going to commit to these areas, be it campaigns or be it seasonality. I mean, this part of the world loves everything. Like, everyone flocked to back to school.
But why 70% of it locked? Why isn't it like 50-50?
So I'm just using
the arbitrary number is what we're talking about. Right?
If you really think, okay, a reason for why you would put 70% of that budget in is because you've got your CFO on your ass who really controls the marketing today, who wants to know what the return on investment is on that 70%. And the CEO has already set ridiculous targets with little context other than what previous growth numbers he might check out, and say, I need to hit these numbers and we need to grow this period over this period of time.
Yeah.
So 70% as a number is to say, okay, here is what I can give you in return for that money spent. And we are going to make these big bets and you get them signed off over a period of time.
But if we're going to, so when we're saying a certain amount of budget is being allocated to something, that something doesn't change. Like, that channel isn't different, that amount of spend isn't different. It's what you're saying within that space.
Within that 70%, I'm saying that, okay, you might run, say this is 70%, let's talk in like yearly perspective for a brand. In that yearly perspective, we're going to run a ton of obviously monthly performance growth campaigns.
Sure.
We might want to run we might have two larger big bets, two campaigns we'll run for the year. And we're gonna say we're gonna do these are gonna be our big bets, and we're gonna plan for these.
Yeah.
What the actual creative or concept is, that's gonna come with time. But this is what we're gonna spend over this period of time. And we're gonna leave 30% of our budget to be reactive to what is happening in social media or in culture or within the market. And we will use that and deploy that at any given point that we want within the year when the marketeers or creators feel relevant. Because that deployment is being reactive and participating in culture and trends that is relevant for the brand.
So just for the basis of the debate, is it the minority portion because you assume it will perform less than the 70% on ROI?
It's a simple, even when you do investments, it's a simple risk reward.
But the assumption, the reason
it's a higher risk play.
Yeah, but so then the assumption is it's a higher risk and it won't return as well.
And if we think about kind of the general conversations that we have when we go into the C-suite and have in these conversations, if you duck it up in that first attempt at being reactive, that budget is immediately going to get pulled from you. So over time, you have to earn that confidence. Burger King is a really good example of a brand that has a framework for their brand as a kind of an annual strategy. They set yearly targets as to what they're trying to achieve. And then they split their budget up in proportion in a way that allows them to be reactive to kind of industry, cultural moments, while kind of staying consistent with the performance and revenue targets that they've got.
I know, but what I'm arguing is, why is it the minority?
It's the minority because it is a higher risk play than, until proven otherwise, than something that we've got back data or history to show us. So, depending on what your brand is, before you say, if we look at some of the brands we've worked with, we know that we have returned better investment on some of the stuff that has been more reactive because of jumping on trends. And arguably, as someone who's strategic, you would build that case to increase that percentage of budget with data points and proof that being reactive to those trends and cultural moments is a reason and justification for why 70% would become 50%. And you would then split the budget equally. But as a starting point today, this region doesn't know how to plan. It doesn't plan, it reacts to everything, and it follows herds of sheep. into different seasonality moments.
But then, if that's the argument, wouldn't you then say that if we're in a region that doesn't plan,
Yep.
you're saying we're going from a region that doesn't plan, so that's 0 to 70% planning. Isn't that a harder sell than a 50%, 50%?
No, because it's a starting point.
But shouldn't the starting point be less rigid, in my mind?
I mean, maybe if you want to try and get it over the line, but at the same time, you're still leading the team. You're kind of leading a creative department into kind of, a chaotic kind of like period. But I get what you're saying. If you're going to try and move them completely, then you'd basically need two teams to set that up in the first place, because the team.
And I actually think that these are two teams. I actually think that anything that is planned from a budget perspective, from a marketing perspective, might be more digital marketing optimization, funnel, CRM, growth guys, right? And so that's a fixed budget. That's a continuous kind of spend. That's like an always-on strategy, whatever. And then the other 50% or 30%, depending on where we land, these guys are more creative, comms, kind of brand, etc. And they ride trends, opportunities, etc. And they're more opportunistic, right? And then they try to kind of be the voice of the brand over time. And whether they spend, the whole 50% of the rest of the budget that month or less is really a product of that month and the opportunity to participate as a brand.
Completely.
But generally speaking, what I have trouble with, and this is where I think you and me always butt heads, is if we agree that a brand needs to be authentic, right, in order for it to be real and add equity and build its kind of loyalty in its base, etc. In order for a brand to be authentic, most of its communication needs to be real and reactive.
Totally.
Right? And so if we agree on those basic fundamentals, then we also need to empower the brand to have that space, to be able to have that voice, to be reactive, to create content and participate in conversations that are real with its audiences and community. And so generally speaking, it needs to be equal to or greater than the amount of time and resources that we give to a, let's say, always on or strategic planning kind of budget for any market, right? And so this is where I have issues. So the only reason I know that doesn't happen is because the real leaders of organizations today are CFOs, right?
Yes.
CEOs are figureheads for culture, values, motivation, etc., and that's great. And they're like the vision and the mission. But people who really lead the organizations today are the people who control the wallet of the company, because everything is short-term money. And unfortunately, most of the brands today spend all of their media on digital channels, which are a new wave of transparency and tracking and ROI measuring that didn't exist, let's say, 67 years ago.
I mean, until iOS 14 came out, all the privacy issues, yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's a different podcast. But I think since that's the name of the game today, and most of the budgets are spent on digital channels, and you can track and measure them, now most of the decisions lay in the hand of kind of finance teams. But
it's also, so just to jump in, it's also because the other issue that we have is that finance teams, people who are non-creative and they operate in a financial world or an Excel world, and if that's kind of what their specialism is, they don't know, and marketers have a responsibility here as well, they don't know how to value creativity. So the question that you typically get is, well, how do I know that's going to return me anything just by doing this extra thing? And it's very hard to put a number on that because it's super subjective.
Especially when the benchmark is something else that you can measure. Exactly.
And if you can measure it, then that's what should be spent on. But that's also why the industry and the creativity, and this isn't just regional, this is kind of across the board, is so vanilla in today's world. Like
everyone looks the same,
sounds the same, does the same, follows the same trends. It's super boring. And the only brands that really kind of stand out are some of the older legacy brands that have really structured and built the strategy around who they are, but kept the framework loose enough to be able to move with larger cultural movements. The BLM stuff in America was a kind of a big kind of shift where some of the brands who had a right to participated, but they were strategic in that. They didn't just react to that and put a social post up. They actually took time to actually invest time in the campaign to actually think about, okay, well, what does this mean for our customers? So there was like pillars that they kind of followed. But the reactive stuff to it, like you can be reactive and you can spend, but if you can't,
I think that's a really interesting point. I think we need to talk about that a little bit. I think one thing that nobody admits and nobody really talks about is the fact that if you optimize for conversion and you use digital marketing channels or social media channels as your main media, what ends up happening, because you're optimizing for conversion all the time and you're targeting the same audiences as your competition, by default, you will all meet in the same place. You will all sound the same. You will all look the same. You will all offer the same thing. Why? Because you're all using the same channels and the same audiences as your conversion optimization points. Which means if Steve and Chris click more on ads that are blue and green, then both brands that target us for the same offering will start to do things in blue and green. If Steve and Chris disposable wallet is X and we have a higher propensity to spend within an offer that is, I don't know, 10 dirhams to 15 dirhams, then everyone will have a proposition that sits within that. If Steve and Chris react more to this type of content with this type of characters and profiles, so by default what happens is, because everyone is targeting the same audiences, everyone is targeting the same channels, everyone is targeting the same segments, etc., the brands that are competing for that attention and competing for that spend end up looking more and more the same, because they're pushed down that direction to optimize on that.
Well, we've been in the conversations, right? In the presentations, the Google, Facebook, like presentations.
Absolutely.
TikTok now, it's the presentation that goes to 20, 30, or 500 brands. It's the same thing.
Exactly. So by default, this is where I go back to planning, strategic versus chaotic or reactive. By default, companies have one of two choices. Continue down that road, right? Which, by the way, gives you no competitive advantage, because everyone is going to use the same tools, the same optimization, the same learnings, etc. And you're all going to end up looking exactly the same. Or you can sacrifice a certain amount of your budget, a certain amount of your kind of creative capabilities, 30%. And build your own character, right? But I would argue that it's more than that, because I feel like it's a big gamble to put the minority of your resources in something that actually makes you. Right?
Sure, so, but you can't prove that to me yet.
I can't prove it to you.
And we've got a group of people who control the money and control kind of what happens, that will want data points, or they're going to just trust you to take a win. By the way, as a CMO, you have lost complete control and power. In actual fact, you're not even in the C-suite anymore. You're just a fly on the wall who's informed of your...
I know, I've lived it a few times. I went from having influence to losing influence.
So you have to earn... So the thing is, you and me, we do agree, and this is why we work well together, because we agree that to get to that point, we know that if you invest more in those trends and you follow and you differentiate yourself to other brands or the herd, that you will stand out over a period of time, but there will be a short-term hit that you might start to feel. Now, we have to, for the brands that listen to this, they have to earn that credibility within the C-suite or from their CFO to actually get there. So practically speaking, you and I would probably love to go 50-50. Let's just 50-50 budget split, but we can't. Brands have to incrementally test that and prove the model. Otherwise, the model will be disproven, and it will be an immediate, no, go back to being a robot on performance marketing and just tell me if you plug in A, what I get for B. That's it. Otherwise I don't see how we'll progress.
No, totally. But I think the main challenge is how you're going to measure success in the two is very different. Because on one side, which is a measurable, strategic digital marketing side, you're going to measure it within a certain time frame. You can track it short term. You can say this brought me X, brought me Y.
But why do we need to measure it to start with, right? You and me, I think you and me can agree on this. Why do I need to measure it straight away, straight off the cuff? Why can't we just take 12 months to just try a load of shit and really participate in kind of a different way of brand and marketing? And why do I have to be held to account? Or what's the average tenure of a CMO? Probably be gone before you even get the results, right?
16 months, I think, or something like that. Yeah. So it goes back to the point of the topic at the beginning. Why aren't we able to measure things long term? Is because we don't have plans and we don't have strategies that stretch that long. So we're saying, in order to be reactive, in order to be able to try things, in order to have a character and be kind of relevant to today's society, yes, you have to build the capability in-house to create that content, create those ads, create that communication style. But you need to have an organization that has enough courage to build a long-term plan that allows for long-term measuring. So a strategy and a plan is necessary. a long-term strategy and a plan is necessary. So that when you do split your budget 70-30, 50-50, whatever it is, you're going to measure at the end of that stretch and not every month and not every 2 weeks and not every quarter.
Yeah.
At the end, you'll see if the long tail of those creative inputs, reactive inputs, gave you anything back vis-a-vis those more strategic, consistent, functional, let's say, marketing strategies.
Completely. And also on the strategy and the plan thing, people, I mean, you and I, we don't like rigid. Things have to adapt and things have to change. So it's like when you're planning, you're basically saying, in the future, this is where we want to get to. It's like that vision, right? You're saying, this is where we want to get to. So here is a rough strategy, a rough plan for how we get there. We're going to follow that broadly by kind of, whatever like period of time, but we will adapt and change within that.
And so the message is super clear. The message is you absolutely need to be reactive. You absolutely need to be creative. You absolutely need to think off the cuff. You need to let your brand react and participate in community and society. But you need to plan long term to give that a chance to be measured appropriately against the more planned, strategic, functional stuff that you do on a day-to-day.
Yeah.
So the vanilla stuff needs to continue. That's going to be your kind of baseline marketing. Mm-hmm. But your character, your reactionary stuff, your personality needs to be set free.
Yeah.
And you're only going to be able to do that consistently if you plan long enough to give it a chance to be measured appropriately.
Agreed.
That's the message.
That is the message.
Awesome.
There you go. And like, and people who work in finance, damn, allow marketers and creators to be creators. Yeah. Otherwise, don't hire them. Just hire a load of performance marketing people and just do plug play.
And long term, I'm ready to put my money on the fact that long term, that's the way you build a sustainable brand that stands the test of time. Yeah. We've seen it with Nike. We've seen it with, Coca-Cola. We've seen it with like all the big brands, whether it's Red Bull, whoever it is, all the brands that have stood the test of time, have built emotional characters to their brands and not just performance-oriented kind of marketing. And so the proof is there. Look at all the brands that have outlasted their founders. Yeah. And there's something to learn here. And I think the Middle East needs to grow up. It needs to really grow up, build strategies, build long-term plans, and stick to them.
100%.
Cool. Thanks.
I think we agree, right?
Yeah, we kind of agree.
Well, we do agree.
Kind of.
Do you know what I'd love to see there? I would love to see a brand that would just say, like, would just take this approach, start small. And I can almost imagine that the percentage of like pre-planned and spend would actually diminish over time. It'd probably end up being like more of a 60-40 in response to reactive.
You're not going to see that here because most people want to sell the companies that they build.
Oh.
That's the truth. That's why the Middle East doesn't have long-term brands, because everybody builds to sell. Nobody builds to keep and to kind of grow over time.
Stay tuned for part 2.
Yeah.
I think this is a separate. We're going to bring this one in.
All right. Ciao.
This is a good one.
Yeah. Bye.
We just had a podcast and we realized that we didn't plan it and we missed all the talking points that we actually wanted to talk about, which is a good segue to what Steve actually wanted to say. And let's just introduce it really quick. Yeah. There's a difference between being busy and being productive.
Exactly.
And so we live in a world where if you're running around and you have no time for anything and you're always super, super busy and you're hustling for life, that you're actually really good and you're working super hard and you're super productive, when in actual fact, it's most likely to be the opposite.
Yeah. Busy is basically the same as being lazy. That's how I'd frame it. And those two things, when you join them together, sound ridiculous, but that is because of what you're saying there. By being busy does not mean you're being productive.
You might be working on a lot of things, but none of them are going to be worthy enough or have enough impact on your business for it to deem that time.
Exactly. But I feel like I'm doing a lot of things, so therefore I feel like I'm achieving a lot, or I'm being like good at what I do.
It's funny because I associate to that a lot.
Yeah, but it's like I've got so much to do, but in reality, the best performers are the ones that have less to do, can operate a work week in probably like 2.5 days a week.
In other words, they're more focused everything efficient. They're doing is more worthy. Exactly. Everything that they're putting their effort and time to is actually going to have a direct impact to the business because they've realized that it would have more impact on the business because they thought about it longer.
Exactly. And on to your point, that if we kind of like really go deeper into that topic, for the longest time, certainly in our kind of like, I don't know, working lives, their whole like pros of hustle culture, Gary V's hustle culture, got to put in the work, do the hours, that whole chaos is kind of been made to be cool and sexy when in reality it's just a load of garbage and it's just a really inefficient way of actually
because it's just panic
panic. But that's cool, right? Because in the startup scene, it's chaos. It's cool. Like, oh, we've done so much, we've achieved so much. But really, you achieve things in a really suboptimal way.
Because then you're just acting on every idea instead of just doing things that are good for the business.
Exactly. And you do it because it's trending or because it's cool. So busy is the same thing as being lazy. And busy does not mean productive. And hustle culture is shit culture.
And don't be lazy.
And don't be lazy.